Undercover owner stays at his own resort, stops cold when he hears two guests. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the marble floors of the Royal Palm Resort, as Daniel Carter wheeled his luggage through the grand entrance. His heart raced slightly, not from the weight of his bags, but from the strangeness of checking into his own hotel as a guest. The crystal chandelier above him, which he had personally selected 7 years ago, sparkled differently from this angle. Today, he wasn't Daniel Carter, the resort owner. He was James Mitchell, an ordinary businessman from Seattle. "Welcome to Royal Palm Resort, sir." A young concierge greeted him with a practiced smile. Daniel recognized her from the employee files, Sarah Chin, hired 3 months ago, but she had no idea who he really was. Most of his staff wouldn't recognize him even if he used his real name. When was the last time he had actually walked these halls, talked to his employees, or experienced the resort as his guests did? "Thank you," Daniel replied, adjusting his fake glasses and running a hand through his newly trimmed hair. "I have a reservation for a week." As Sarah typed on her computer, Daniel observed the lobby with fresh eyes. A family struggled with their toddler's tantrum near the elevators, while a couple argued quietly by the coffee shop about their room preferences. These were the real moments happening in his resort, moments he had missed while sitting in board meetings and pursuing new property developments across the country. "Here you are, Mr. Mitchell. You're in Suite 1217, one of our premium ocean view rooms." Sarah's voice pulled him back to the present. "Thomas will help you with your luggage. Would you like a tour of our facilities?" Daniel almost declined automatically. He knew every inch of this place, after all, but caught himself. "Yes, that would be helpful," he said, reminding himself to stay in character. As Thomas, a tall bellhop with an easy smile, led him through the resort, Daniel noticed things he had never seen in the quarterly reports. The paint near the indoor pool was peeling slightly. The tropical plants in the atrium looked less vibrant than he remembered. A service door squeaked loudly when a maid pushed her cart through it. "The spa underwent renovation last year," Thomas mentioned as they passed the wellness center. "Though between you and me, sir, the old steam room was better. This new one takes forever to heat up properly." Daniel frowned. He had approved that renovation without ever visiting the site. How many other decisions had he made from behind a desk, trusting only spreadsheets and second-hand reports? In his suite, Daniel tipped Thomas generously and walked to the balcony. The view of the Pacific was breathtaking, at least that hadn't changed. Waves crashed against the private beach below, where guests lounged under branded umbrellas. He had built this paradise from nothing, turning a rundown motel into a 5-star resort. Back then, he knew every employee's name, personally greeted guests, and could spot a maintenance issue from a mile away. His phone buzzed, another email from his executive team about the upcoming board meeting. Daniel ignored it. For the next week, James Mitchell wouldn't care about board meetings or profit margins. That evening, he decided to eat at the resort's casual lounge rather than the formal restaurant. The lounge, with its warm wood panels and comfortable leather chairs, was designed to make guests feel at home. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, and the bartender was entertaining customers with skillful cocktail mixing. "First time at Royal Palm?" the woman next to him at the bar asked. She wore an elegant black dress that suggested money but not ostentation. "Yes," Daniel replied, sipping his whiskey. "Though I've heard good things." "Oh, it used to be the best," she said, stirring her martini. "Still nice, but something's changed in the last few years. It's lost that personal touch, you know? My husband and I have been coming here for a decade, and lately it feels more like a corporation than a resort." The criticism stung more than Daniel expected. He wanted to defend himself, explain the challenges of managing a growing hospitality empire, but James Mitchell wouldn't know about any of that. "What changed?" he asked instead, genuinely curious. "Hard to put my finger on it. The old owner used to be around all the time. What was his name? Carter, I think. He'd chat with guests, host special events. Now it's all managed by some company, and you can tell. The staff tries their best, but..." She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. Daniel excused himself and walked to the restroom, needing a moment alone. In the mirror, James Mitchell's reflection stared back at him, a stranger in his own hotel. When had he last hosted a guest event? When had he stopped being the owner who cared and became just another corporate figure? The week stretching ahead of him suddenly felt crucial. He needed to see his resort through fresh eyes, understand what had changed, and figure out if it could be fixed. But as he left the restroom, a conversation from a nearby private booth caught his attention. Two men were speaking in low voices, but their words carried clearly in the quiet corner. "The paperwork is almost ready. The board will vote him out. He won't see it coming. He's never here anyway." Daniel froze, his hand still on the restroom door. They couldn't be talking about, but who else would they mean? His chest tightened as he forced himself to walk casually past the booth, catching a glimpse of the speakers, both familiar faces from previous investor meetings. Someone was planning to take his resort away from him. And from the sound of it, they were right about one thing: he had no idea it was coming. Back in his suite, Daniel paced the room, his mind racing. He had come here to reconnect with his resort, but instead, he had stumbled upon a plot to steal it from him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had to become someone else to finally see the truth about his own business. Tomorrow, he would start digging deeper. But for now, he stood on the balcony, watching his beloved resort's lights twinkle in the darkness, wondering how many other secrets it held, and how many of them were his own fault. The next morning, Daniel woke up before sunrise, his mind still churning with questions about the conversation he'd overheard. As James Mitchell, he had more freedom to investigate than he would as the owner. He dressed casually in khakis and a polo shirt, hoping to blend in with the early morning crowd at the fitness center. The gym was surprisingly busy at 6 a.m. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the sky turn from purple to orange while walking on a treadmill. A group of executives in premium workout gear clustered around the weights section, their conversations a mix of business deals and vacation plans. "That's Harrison over there," a woman on the next treadmill whispered to her friend, nodding toward a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. "He's on the board of directors. My husband works in investment banking. Apparently, there's big money moving around this place lately." Daniel's pace faltered slightly. Jeffrey Harrison was indeed on his board, but they hadn't spoken directly in months. The older man was doing shoulder presses while chatting with someone Daniel didn't recognize, a younger man in an impeccable tracksuit who seemed to be taking mental notes on everything Harrison said. After his workout, Daniel lingered in the juice bar, strategically choosing a seat within earshot of Harrison's table. The younger man was speaking now, his voice carrying an urgency that seemed out of place in a resort setting. "The Asian markets are particularly interested," the young man said, sliding what looked like a tablet across the table. "They see the potential for expansion. Carter's been sitting on this gold mine, playing it safe." Harrison grunted. "That's always been his problem. No vision beyond this one property. The brand could be international by now." He paused to sip his protein shake. "Is everything prepared for next week's meeting?" "Michael has the presentations ready. Once the numbers are revealed, the board won't have a choice." Daniel nearly choked on his smoothie. Michael, they had to mean Michael Harrington, his CFO and oldest friend. The same Michael who had helped him secure the initial loan to buy this property, who had stood beside him through every crisis and celebration. Before he could process this betrayal, his phone buzzed. A text from his executive assistant. "Emergency board meeting called for next Thursday. MH requesting full financial review." The pieces were falling into place. Next Thursday, that gave him just 6 days to figure out what was happening and stop it. But first, he needed more information. Throughout the morning, Daniel explored areas of the resort he'd normally never visit as the owner. In the laundry facility, he overheard staff complaining about budget cuts to their department. Near the loading dock, suppliers argued with receiving managers about late payments. Every conversation painted a picture he hadn't seen from his executive office. By afternoon, he'd made his way to the resort's business center, which offered private offices for guests. Through careful observation, He noticed Harrison and his young companion using Office 3 regularly. During their coffee break, Daniel slipped into the empty room. The trash can yielded a crumpled notepad page with hastily scribbled figures, projections for the resort's value after some kind of restructuring. The numbers were staggering, nearly triple the current valuation. What caught his eye, however, was a name in the margin: Azure Dragon Holdings. Back in his suite, Daniel used his personal laptop to research Azure Dragon Holdings. It was a Chinese investment firm known for aggressive takeovers of luxury properties. Their pattern was consistent: buy undervalued assets, strip them down, and rebuild them as ultra-luxury international brands. His resort wasn't just facing a hostile takeover, it was at risk of losing its entire identity. That evening, Daniel decided to attend the resort's weekly manager's dinner, an event he'd never participated in as owner. As James Mitchell, he easily secured an invitation by expressing interest in hosting corporate events at the property. The dinner was held in a private dining room, with about 20 departmental managers and a few selected guests. Michael Harrington sat at the head of the table, looking exactly as Daniel remembered, except for the dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremor in his hand as he lifted his wine glass. "We're proud of our personal touch here at Royal Palm," Michael was saying to the guests. "Our owner believes in maintaining the highest standards of—" He stopped abruptly, his voice catching. Daniel watched his friend's face carefully. Was that guilt he saw? Or fear? The conversation around the table flowed naturally to the resort's future plans. Several managers mentioned expansion possibilities, their excitement obvious. But Daniel noticed how Michael tensed at each mention of growth, his knuckles whitening around his wine glass. "Mr. Harrington," the young man from the gym called out, "perhaps you could share some insights about the upcoming changes?" Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're always evolving to serve our guests better. But the heart of Royal Palm will remain the same, a place where luxury meets personal connection." The words sounded hollow, rehearsed. This wasn't the Michael that Daniel knew, the man who could electrify a room with his passion for hospitality. Something was very wrong. As the dinner wound down, Daniel overheard snippets of conversation between Michael and Harrison. "The papers are ready, board meeting Thursday, everything in order." Michael looked sick as he nodded along, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. Back in his suite, Daniel sat on the balcony, watching the same waves he'd watched for years, but seeing them differently now. The resort's lights reflected off the water, creating a beautiful illusion of stability. But beneath the surface, everything was changing. His phone buzzed again, another message from his executive assistant. "Urgent, review these documents before Thursday." Attached were financial reports he should have read weeks ago. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the ocean breeze on his face. Tomorrow, he would need to confront Michael. The thought made his stomach turn. This was more than a business partner's betrayal. This was his best friend, the godfather to his children, the man who had helped him build his dream. But first, he needed to understand why. What had driven Michael to this point? And more importantly, what had Daniel missed while he was busy chasing expansion dreams instead of protecting what he'd already built? The waves crashed below, their rhythm unchanged by the human dramas playing out above them. Daniel had one chance to save his resort, but to do that, he might have to destroy the longest friendship of his life. Daniel spent the early hours of the next morning in his suite, combing through years of financial reports on his laptop. As James Mitchell, he had to be careful about accessing these documents remotely, using a secure private network he'd set up before starting this undercover mission. The numbers told a disturbing story. Over the past 18 months, the resort's profit margins had steadily declined. Maintenance costs had skyrocketed, while occupancy rates dipped during off-peak seasons. But what really caught his attention were the loan documents. There were 3 new loans he hadn't authorized, all taken out in the past year. A knock at his door startled him. Through the peephole, he saw Sarah, the concierge from check-in. "Mr. Mitchell? I have a message for you from Mr. Harrington's office," she said, handing him an envelope. "He would like to meet with you regarding your interest in corporate events." Inside the envelope was a formal invitation to lunch at the resort's exclusive rooftop restaurant. Daniel had built that restaurant 5 years ago, investing millions in its unique rotating platform that offered 360-degree views of the coast. Now, it would be the setting for what might be the most difficult conversation of his life. Before the lunch, Daniel visited the resort's spa, not for relaxation, but because he noticed something odd in the renovation expenses. The new steam room that Thomas had complained about had cost nearly triple the original budget. The spa manager, a friendly woman named Gloria, was happy to chat with a curious guest. The renovation was strange, she confided while showing him around. We had perfectly good equipment, but suddenly we had to replace everything. The contractors weren't our usual team either, some company called Azure Building Solutions. Daniel's breath caught. Azure, the same name connected to the hostile takeover attempt. The spa renovation had been a front, a way to funnel money out of the resort. But why? At precisely noon, Daniel stepped into the rooftop restaurant. Michael was already there, seated at a corner table with a stunning view of the coastline. He looked smaller somehow, his usually impeccable suit slightly wrinkled. Mr. Mitchell. Michael stood to greet him. Thank you for joining me. They ordered drinks, and Michael launched into a practice pitch about the resort's corporate event packages. But his hands shook slightly as he turned the pages of the brochure, and his voice lacked its usual confidence. Mr. Harrington, Daniel interrupted gently. Let's talk about Azure Dragon Holdings instead. The color drained from Michael's face. His water glass tipped, spilling across the white tablecloth. How do you? He started, then caught himself. I'm not familiar with that organization. I think you are, Daniel said, removing his fake glasses. Just like you're familiar with Azure Building Solutions, and the 3 unauthorized loans, and the board meeting scheduled for Thursday. Michael's eyes widened in recognition. Daniel? He whispered, horror spreading across his face. How long have you been here? Long enough to know my best friend is trying to steal my resort, Daniel replied, keeping his voice steady despite the anger and hurt churning inside him. The question is why? Michael glanced around frantically, then leaned forward. Not here, he hissed. Meet me in the old beach maintenance shed in an hour. Please. I can explain everything. The maintenance shed had been one of their first renovation projects, now used only for storing old equipment. As Daniel approached it an hour later, memories flooded back. Late nights planning renovations, sharing beers and dreams of what the resort could become. Michael was waiting inside, pacing between stacked pool chairs and dusty filing cabinets. When Daniel entered, he looked like he might be sick. They have everything, Michael burst out. Records of every shortcut we took during the initial renovation. The permits that weren't quite in order. The local officials we convinced to look the other way. Everything. Daniel was shocked. Those early days had been desperate. They'd done what they had to do to get the resort opened on schedule. But they'd fixed everything later, brought everything up to code. That's not all, Michael continued, pulling out his phone. They found out about the Anderson account. The Anderson account, their secret fund for handling problems discreetly, keeping certain transactions off the official books. It wasn't illegal, exactly, but it wouldn't look good to regulators. 6 months ago, they showed me what they had. Michael's voice cracked. Said if I didn't cooperate, they'd release everything to the Gaming Commission, the tax authority, everyone. The resort would be finished. You'd face charges. I tried to buy time, tried to find a way out. So you helped them set up a takeover instead? Daniel's voice rose. Gave them access to our finances? Let them plant their people on our board. I thought I could protect you, Michael shouted back. They were going to destroy everything anyway. At least this way, the resort survives. You get a generous buyout, no charges. He deflated. I was trying to save what I could. Daniel leaned against a rusty filing cabinet, his mind racing. Every decision he'd made to expand, to chase new properties, had left Michael here dealing with the consequences. While he'd been dreaming of a resort empire, Others had been quietly gathering the ammunition to destroy him. "Thursday," he said finally. "That's when they make their move?" Michael nodded miserably. "They have the votes. Once the board sees the financial records, the real ones, they'll have no choice but to accept the Azure Dragon offer." "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I never wanted." "Stop." Daniel held up his hand. "You said you've been buying time. How much money do we have left in the Anderson account?" "About 2 million. Why?" A plan was forming in Daniel's mind. It was desperate, possibly illegal, and would require perfect timing. But it might be their only chance. "When's your next meeting with the Azure Dragon team?" "Tomorrow morning. They want to review the presentation for Thursday." Daniel smiled grimly. "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do." As they talked through the plan, the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the shed's dusty windows. They were either about to save everything, or lose it all trying. But for the first time since this nightmare began, they were working together again, just like in the old days, when nothing seemed impossible. They just had to hope their friendship would survive what came next. The plan was set in motion at dawn. Daniel watched from his sweet balcony as the morning shift arrived, staff who had no idea their workplace was about to become a battlefield. The weight of their livelihoods pressed heavily on his conscience. Whatever happened today would affect hundreds of families, not just his own. He changed into his sharpest suit, no more playing James Mitchell. The story of the undercover boss was about to become public, but not in the way anyone expected. First stop, the security office. Frank Martinez, head of security for 15 years, nearly fell out of his chair when Daniel walked in. "Mr. Carter? We thought you were in Singapore." "Frank, I need access to every security camera feed from the past 6 months," Daniel said, closing the door. "And I need your word that what happens next stays between us." While Frank pulled up the footage, Daniel received a text from Michael. "Azure team arriving early. Meeting in boardroom instead of my office. Something's wrong." Daniel's pulse quickened. He'd known the plan was risky, but they were running out of options. On the security monitors, he watched Harrison and the Azure team enter the resort's executive boardroom. Their body language was tense, aggressive. "There," Daniel pointed at a screen showing footage from 3 months ago. "Can you enhance that?" The grainy image showed a late-night meeting in the parking garage. Harrison with 2 men Daniel recognized as high-ranking officials from the Gaming Commission. Money changed hands. "Download everything from that night," Daniel instructed. "And the spa renovation footage too." His phone buzzed again. "Michael, they know." Daniel cursed under his breath. "Frank, I need the PA system. Resort-wide." "But sir, that's only for emergencies." "Trust me, this qualifies." In the executive boardroom, Michael stood facing the Azure team, his hands steady for the first time in days. Harrison was red-faced, shouting about breach of contract. The younger man from the gym was frantically typing on his phone. Daniel's voice echoed through every speaker in the resort. "Attention all guests and staff. This is Daniel Carter, owner of Royal Palm Resort. In 5 minutes, I will be making an announcement in the main lobby that affects everyone in this building. I encourage all guests, staff, and especially our friends from Azure Dragon Holdings to attend." The lobby filled quickly. Daniel spotted several familiar faces: Sarah the concierge, Thomas the bellhop, Gloria from the spa. Guests emerged from elevators and restaurants, drawn by the drama. The Azure team arrived last, flanking Harrison like bodyguards. Standing on the grand staircase, Daniel felt the weight of every eye in the room. "For the past week, I've been staying here as a guest named James Mitchell. I came to reconnect with my resort, but I found something else, a conspiracy to take it away from my guests, my staff, and me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He saw Sarah's eyes widen in recognition. "Azure Dragon Holdings planned to purchase this resort through a hostile takeover, strip it down, and rebuild it as something unrecognizable. They exploited past mistakes, blackmailed my friend and CFO, and bribed officials to help their cause." The younger Azure man stepped forward. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Carter. Our lawyers will. Your lawyers will be busy with these. Daniel nodded to Frank, who began distributing tablets to the gathered board members. Security footage of your team bribing gaming officials. Documentation of money laundering through our spa renovation. Evidence of insider trading based on the planned takeover. Harrison lunged forward. You can't prove. Actually, Michael's voice rang out as he descended the stairs. I can. Because I've been gathering evidence since they first approached me. Every meeting, every threat, every illegal demand, it's all documented. The shock on Harrison's face turned to fury. You recorded us? That's illegal in this state. Not when you're documenting a criminal conspiracy, Michael replied. Something I learned from all those legal seminars you insisted I attend to prepare for my new role. Daniel raised his voice again. I'm offering Azure Dragon Holdings a choice. Withdraw your takeover bid and leave my resort, or I release everything to the Gaming Commission, SEC, and media. The lobby fell silent. Even the fountains seemed to hold their breath. You're bluffing, the younger man said, but his voice wavered. You'd risk everything? The scandal would still damage the resort. The resort isn't just a business, Daniel replied, looking around at the faces of his staff. It's a family. And I'm done letting people threaten my family. The next hour passed in a blur of lawyers, documents, and thinly veiled threats. By sunset, the Azure team had withdrawn their bid and left the property. Harrison resigned from the board, along with 2 other members who had been part of the conspiracy. Later that evening, Daniel found Michael sitting alone in the lounge, staring into an untouched glass of whiskey. You knew I was here the whole time, didn't you? Daniel asked, taking the seat beside him. Michael smiled weakly. Not at first. But then you started asking questions only an owner would think to ask. And you still do that thing with your watch when you're nervous. Why didn't you tell me? I needed you to see everything for yourself. The problems with the resort, the staff's concerns, what we almost lost because we stopped paying attention to what matters. Daniel nodded slowly. I owe you an apology. I left you here to deal with everything while I chased expansion dreams. And I should have told you about Azure's threats immediately. Michael sighed. We both forgot what made this place special in the first place. They sat in companionable silence, watching guests move through the lobby. Each face told a story: honeymoon couples starting their lives together, families making memories, business travelers finding comfort far from home. I can't stay, Michael said finally. Not after everything that's happened. The trust is broken. I know, Daniel replied, feeling the weight of change. But I'll always be grateful. You didn't betray me, you saved us all. As Michael stood to leave, he placed an old key on the bar. To the maintenance shed, he explained. Keep it as a reminder of where we started, and what's worth fighting for. Daniel watched his friend walk away, the key heavy in his hand. The resort had survived, but the real work was just beginning. He had a lot to prove, to his staff, his guests, and himself. But first, he had some thank you notes to write, starting with a certain concierge who had unknowingly helped save her workplace by treating James Mitchell like any other guest. 3 weeks after the Azure Dragon crisis, the Royal Palm Resort hummed with renewed energy. Daniel had moved out of the presidential suite and into a modest office near the staff entrance. His mornings now began at 5 a.m., joining the housekeeping team for their daily briefing. The East Wing renovations start next week, he announced to the assembled staff. But this time, we're doing it differently. Each department will have a representative on the planning committee. You know this resort better than any contractor. I want your input on everything. Maria, the head housekeeper who'd worked at Royal Palm since its opening, raised her hand. The carpets in the hallways, Mr. Carter. They're beautiful, but impossible to clean efficiently. Maybe something more practical this time? Daniel smiled, remembering how he'd chosen those carpets from a catalog without considering the maintenance implications. Exactly the kind of insight we need, Maria. Would you lead the flooring selection team? The changes went beyond physical renovations. Daniel established an employee council with representatives from every department. He implemented an anonymous feedback system where staff could report concerns directly to management. The Anderson account was closed, its remaining funds redistributed into employee training programs and benefit improvements. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for new board members, Daniel received an unexpected visitor. The woman from his first night at the bar, the one who'd commented on the resort's changing atmosphere, stood in his doorway. "Mrs. Reynolds," he greeted her, standing. "What brings you to this part of the resort?" "Curiosity," she replied, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "I've been coming here for 10 years, Mr. Carter. The changes in the past few weeks, they remind me of how this place used to feel. Is that a good thing?" "That depends. Are these changes just for show, or are you really back?" The question struck deeper than she probably intended. Daniel walked to his window, watching staff members cross the courtyard below. Thomas was helping an elderly guest with her bags, taking time to point out the garden features along the way. Sarah was training a new concierge, their heads bent together over the computer terminal. "I lost my way for a while," he admitted. "Forgot that luxury isn't just about thread counts and wine lists. It's about making people feel valued, guests and staff alike." Mrs. Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Well, you've got one vote of confidence. Our company is hosting a global conference next spring. 300 rooms for a week. I was considering the new Meridian Hotel, but..." She smiled. "I think we'll stick with Royal Palm." The booking was exactly the kind of high-profile event the resort needed, but Daniel had learned his lesson about priorities. "Before you decide, I'd like you to meet with our events team. Not just the managers, the staff who will actually be handling your conference. They'll give you an honest assessment of what we can and can't deliver." Later that week, Daniel initiated a new tradition: monthly town halls where every employee could speak directly with management. The first meeting was held in the ballroom, traditionally reserved for weddings and galas. "Our occupancy rates are climbing," he reported to the assembled staff. "But more importantly, our employee satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in 5 years. This is your victory, not mine." A young waiter raised his hand. "What about the expansion plans? Are we still opening new properties?" Daniel shared a knowing look with Gloria from the spa. "Actually, I have a different kind of expansion in mind. Starting next month, we're extending our training program to include local high school students interested in hospitality careers. I want Royal Palm to be known not just for luxury, but for creating opportunities." The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Daniel remembered his own start in the industry, a summer job at a small motel that had sparked his passion for hospitality. Sometimes growth meant going deeper, not wider. After the meeting, he found himself in the kitchen, where Chef Marcus was preparing for dinner service. The kitchen had always been the heart of the resort, but Daniel had rarely visited in recent years. "Taste this," Marcus insisted, offering a spoon of sauce. "New recipe for the fall menu. Local ingredients, traditional technique, but with a twist." The sauce was perfect, familiar yet surprising. Like the resort itself, Daniel thought. You didn't always need to reinvent something to make it special. Back in his office, Daniel found an envelope on his desk. Inside was a letter of resignation from Harrison's young protege, along with a USB drive containing evidence of other resorts Azure Dragon had targeted. Daniel forwarded the information to the appropriate authorities. Some battles weren't just about protecting your own interests. The maintenance shed key still sat on his desk, now framed in a simple shadow box. Beneath it, he'd added a new motto for the resort: "Luxury is personal." That night, as the resort settled into its evening rhythm, Daniel walked the halls one last time, not as an undercover guest or a distant owner, but as someone who had finally found his place. From the lobby, he could hear Sarah checking in a family, her warm welcome making them feel immediately at home. In the lounge, the jazz trio played while Thomas, off-duty but still in uniform, taught an elderly guest how to use video chat to connect with her grandchildren. These were the moments that mattered. Not board meetings or profit margins, but the small interactions that made people feel valued. The resort wasn't just surviving anymore, It was thriving, one personal connection at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Daniel was ready for them. He had rediscovered what had made Royal Palms special in the first place. It wasn't the building or the amenities, but the people who brought it to life every day. And this time, he would be right there with them, making sure they never lost that magic again. 1 year after the attempted takeover, Royal Palm Resort hosted its first annual Employee Recognition Gala. The ballroom sparkled with new chandeliers, chosen by a committee of housekeeping staff for both beauty and maintainability. Every table featured centerpieces designed by the groundskeeping team, showcasing local flowers they now grew in the resort's own greenhouse. Daniel stood at the podium, surveying the room filled with employees and their families. Some wore their uniforms proudly, others were dressed in their finest evening wear, but all shared the same sense of ownership in the resort's success. A year ago, he began, this resort faced its greatest challenge. Not from outside competitors or market forces, but from losing sight of what makes hospitality truly special. Tonight, we celebrate not just our recovery, but our transformation. The screens around the ballroom displayed the year's achievements, record guest satisfaction scores, industry awards for employee development programs, and features in leading travel magazines praising the resort's innovative approach to sustainable luxury. But numbers and awards don't tell the real story, Daniel continued. The real story is in the details, like how our Bell staff created a scavenger hunt program for children checking in, making travel days an adventure instead of a hassle. Or how our maintenance team's energy-saving initiatives didn't just cut costs, but inspired guests to implement similar programs in their own businesses. He gestured to a special table near the front. We have some guests here tonight who experienced our transformation firsthand. Mrs. Reynolds, whose company's global conference last spring broke our event satisfaction records, thanks to the personalized service plan our staff developed. Mrs. Reynolds raised her glass in acknowledgement, surrounded by some of her company's executives who had become regular guests. And we have someone else here tonight, Daniel smiled. Someone who helped us remember what matters most. Sarah Chin, now the head of guest relations, blushed as the spotlight found her. Sarah, your kindness to a supposedly ordinary guest named James Mitchell reminded us that every interaction matters. The awards ceremony that followed highlighted achievements across every department. The new employee education program had helped 5 staff members earn college degrees. The apprenticeship initiative had welcomed its second class of local students. Even the jazz trio from the lounge had something to celebrate. Their weekly performances now included original compositions inspired by the resort's atmosphere. As dinner was served, Daniel visited each table, not as an owner making rounds, but as part of the family celebrating together. At the kitchen staff's table, Chef Marcus proudly introduced his daughter, who had just started in the apprenticeship program. The housekeeping team showed off photos of the new employee wellness center they had helped design. As the evening wound down, Daniel found himself back in his modest office, now decorated with mementos from the past year, thank you notes from guests, pictures from staff celebrations, the maintenance shed key still in its shadow box. A new frame had joined it, containing a simple guest comment card that read, "For the first time in years of luxury travel, I felt like I wasn't just staying at a hotel, I was being welcomed home." His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Michael, now running a successful hospitality consulting firm. "Saw the news about the certification program. You did it, my friend. Not just saving the resort, but making it better than we ever imagined." Daniel smiled, typing back, "We did it. All of us." Looking out his window at the resort grounds, now bathed in moonlight, Daniel saw a family arriving late, tired parents, cranky children. He watched as Thomas and Sarah coordinated seamlessly, Thomas entertaining the kids with stories about the resort's secret gardens, while Sarah expedited the check-in process. The parents' tension visibly melted away. This was what he had almost lost, what he had fought to protect, not the property or the profits, but these moments of genuine care that turned strangers into family. Daniel turned off his office light and walked through the quiet halls of his resort. In the kitchen, the overnight crew was preparing for breakfast. In the lounge, the last notes of jazz faded away. At the front desk, the night team welcomed late arrivals with the same warmth they'd show in daylight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that luxury could be both exceptional and personal. But tonight, Daniel Carter slept soundly, knowing that his resort was in the best possible hands, the hands of people who cared about it as much as he did. The Royal Palm Resort hadn't just survived a takeover attempt. It had rediscovered its soul, and in doing so, had become something even more valuable than its impressive balance sheet suggested, a place where both guests and staff could truly belong. And that was worth more than all the hostile takeover bids in the world.